Hello. Today I am going to talk about Taiwan, which I am calling here the other China. And I'm going to explain why I would like to call it that and why I think it's a place that we very much need to pay attention to. My name is Tim Weston, and I teach in the Department of History at the University of Colorado Boulder. And this is a topic that I have developed a very real interest in recent years. Having spent a summer in Taiwan recently, these issues became very apparent to me, and they're clearly of great importance to people in Taiwan itself. So what I'm doing here is drawing a distinction between the Republic of China, represented by the flag with the blue sun, the sun in the blue corner of the flag on the upper left, and its passport at the bottom, Republic of China, very clearly written, and the People's Republic of China, on the other hand, represented by the passport on the right, where it clearly says the People's Republic of China, and it has the star of the People's Republic, the flag of the People's Republic of China. These are essentially two separate states, but they are claimed by China proper as being properly one political order, one political state. In terms of their populations, they couldn't be more different. Taiwan, with a population of some 23 million people, is relatively small in the world, but ranks 50th in the world, and is dwarfed by the People's Republic of China on mainland China, which is the most populous country in the world at 1,350,000,000 people, making it 58 times more populous than Taiwan. So today, China, and when I say China, I'm talking about the People's Republic of China, is everywhere in our media. A variety of different kinds of issues bring China to the fore: business issues, issues of fashion, issues of political conflict with the United States, interest and issues in trade policy with China, conflict over that. The sports prowess of China is growing. The most recent Nobel Prize winner in literature, shown here on the screen at the bottom, Mo Yan, has also brought glory to China in the cultural realm. So people can be excused today for thinking only of China itself, and meaning by that the People's Republic of China, and thinking very little about what I'm calling again the other China, Taiwan. But we don't have to go back too far in time to find a time when Americans actually knew almost nothing about China or the People's Republic of China, and by contrast knew a great deal, or thought they did at least, about Taiwan or the Republic of China. So we go from the screen on the left, where China more or less meant to Americans, people in the United States who are interested in that part of the world, and in China in particular, where Taiwan is the featured China, the small island that it is, surrounded by the sea. We see that screen on the left, and we've gone from that to the map on the right, where Taiwan appears as a small island off the coast of Southeast China, dwarfed by, of course, mainland China. And it is our attention that has shifted in recent decades from the Taiwan, to the other China, the People's Republic of China. And what I want to do now is explore a little bit why that happened and how that happened. I think the story begins most clearly with the formation of regularized normal relations between the People's Republic of China and the United States. And that was a treaty signed in the late 1970s. And there we see in the black and white photograph Deng Xiaoping, the then leader of China, and President Jimmy Carter signing this historic document, restoring relations, normal, friendly relations, at least on paper, between the People's Republic of China and the United States. And in order to do this, the Chinese in Beijing required the United States to sever relations with Taiwan or the Republic of China. And I'll say a bit more about that shortly. The Time magazine cover that we see here as well represents the moving away from Marx that all of this seemed to signal in the People's Republic of China. That is the moving away from high socialism, from communism, the sort of chaos, the political chaos of the Mao years, the Mao Zedong years, to a shift to a more market economy and a more outwardly looking trade policy and cultural policy. And thereafter, we see tremendous growth in China. People are probably familiar with the basic idea that the Chinese economy is surging. It has been doing so for decades, the longest continuous massive economic growth in recorded human history has brought China into the ranks of the leading economies of the world. And soon it has recently surpassed Japan to become the second most wealthy country in the world in terms of overall wealth. And it is projected to, in the near future, surpass the United States to become the largest economy in the world. So very clearly, what is happening is that China is rising in terms of its economic status, which of course gives a great throw weight in terms of its military prowess, its cultural prowess, and so on and so forth. So China, in other words, since the opening of formal relations with the United States in the late 1970s, has boomed economically and emerged as something of a, well, as certainly a world power, one that many see as rising to the foremost place geopolitically in the century unfolding. With that as background, then, what I'd like to do is talk about four different subjects, and all of this, again, with the idea in mind that the rise of the People's Republic of China, or mainland China, has led to the lowering of the prominence and the understanding as a result of the Republic of China on Taiwan. So in many respects, I believe Taiwan has been lost in all of this. And one measure of that is the classroom in the United States University. Whereas, go back several decades, Taiwan was featured. The story of Taiwan, the story of World War II in the United States, and the support for Chiang Kai-shek, who ended up on Taiwan, was a very important part of the larger discussion about what is China. Today, Taiwan hardly merits mention in most survey history courses on China. Taiwanese literature has shrunk to a very, very small place in the larger curriculum of Chinese literary studies. But Taiwan, in many respects, then, I'm thinking, has been lost in the rise of the People's Republic of China. And yet I think we very much need to bring it back into our field of vision. And I've listed here the four main topics that I'd like to address that I think support that point. And I will be addressing them in order from 1, 2, 3, 4, as you see here on the screen. Starting with the very important point that Taiwan is a potential flashpoint for war. And this emerges because when the United States normalized relations with the People's Republic of China, with its capital in Beijing, the Chinese required the United States to adopt what is called the One China policy. The One China policy refers to the notion that if you have formal relations with the People's Republic of China, you can only have relations with the People's Republic of China. You cannot at the same time have relations with the Republic of China on Taiwan, because the Chinese government in Beijing has long claimed that Taiwan is part of China. It hasn't been returned to China, but it must be returned to China in due time. So in other words, as I have here on the screen, Beijing claims that Taiwan is part of China and one day must be returned to China's control. One of the parts of the normalization of relations between the United States and China then was the United States accepting of the One China policy. But at the same time, there were people in the United States Congress who were very concerned not to sell out the interests of China's longtime ally, the Republic of China. And so, while on the one hand, the United States accepted the notion of One China, on the other hand, Congress passed what's called the Taiwan Relations Act. And when the United States and China then renewed relations in the late 70s, the Taiwan Relations Act was seen as kind of buffer to protect Taiwan from aggression, if that should arise, from China, which claims that it is the rightful ruler of Taiwan and therefore has the right one day to absorb Taiwan back into the fold. The Taiwan Relations Act is a key piece of legislation that stipulates that the United States will, and quote, I quote here, consider any effort to determine the future of Taiwan by other than peaceful means, including boycotts or embargoes, a threat to the peace and security of the Western Pacific area and of grave concern to the United States. In other words, the relations between China and Taiwan must be handled peacefully. The United States does not intend to negotiate between Taiwan and China in terms of their future political relations, although it will certainly always be a key factor in all of that. But it does require that the process be handled peacefully, at least insofar as Beijing's treatment of Taiwan. The act also stipulates that the United States should, on a regular basis, on a constant rolling basis, provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character to assure that Taiwan can protect itself in the event of an attack from the mainland. And so we see this headline here in the China Daily, which is a mainland Chinese newspaper published in English, stating Beijing furious at arms sales, and that is American arms sales to Taiwan. And this is a recurring problem between China, Beijing, and Washington, D.C. And it stems from the very late 1970s and the Taiwan Relations Act. And it is an ongoing sort of source of tension between the two states. And it is exacerbated by the fact that in Taiwan, there has grown up a very significant independence movement. And by independence movement, I'm referring to the idea among more and more people who live on Taiwan that they are not one day to be part of mainland China, but instead constitute a separate state, a separate culture, a separate society, and therefore should formally declare themselves a state, moving away from this ongoing idea that one day the leaders of Taiwan and the leaders of China will negotiate some kind of agreement that will bring Taiwan and China into the same political system. These are people, therefore, who say Taiwan, not China, as you see here on the banner. Taiwan should be Taiwan. It should not be part of China. And this independence movement in Taiwan is extremely threatening to Beijing's interests. It represents the idea that many in Taiwan are unwilling in the future to be part of the larger Chinese polity, which Beijing believes is the rightful future organization of that part of the world. In the Taiwan independence movement, I think we have to understand against the backdrop of Taiwanese history. Very briefly, no government in Beijing has controlled Taiwan since the late 19th century, since 1895, at which time the Japanese took over control of Taiwan and ruled as a colony for some 50 years. And thereafter, the Republic of China was founded in Taiwan. Beijing did not control that either. It was a separate government. So really, for well over a century, Taiwan has not been controlled by the government in Beijing. And I think this helps us understand then why it is that an independence movement could grow up. And in this chart here, I think we can see very interesting information. These are a variety of different surveys among Taiwanese people as to who they are, what their identity is. Do they see themselves as Taiwanese? Do they see themselves as Chinese? Do they see themselves as both Taiwanese and Chinese? Now let's understand that everybody on both sides of the issue, people who live in Taiwan, people who live in China, speak Chinese. They consider themselves heirs to Chinese history and Chinese culture. But the question is, do they belong to the same society, to the same political order, or do they think of themselves as separate? And what we see from this graph, which is compiles information from very recent past. So the majority of people who live on the island of Taiwan consider themselves Taiwanese first, Chinese second, or they believe themselves to be Taiwanese and to share some kind of Taiwanese and Chinese identity. But overwhelmingly, the column in green here points out that people on Taiwan do not see themselves as belonging to the larger Chinese political order. Perhaps they are culturally Chinese, but they do not want to be part of the Chinese state based in Beijing. At the same time, if we call what I've just discussed a rising sort of Taiwanese independent nationalism, we have to understand that on mainland China, there is a strong nationalism as well. In fact, we have two competing nationalisms. And in mainland China, the nationalism argument is that Taiwan should be part of mainland China, that it always has been, that it should be again, and that notwithstanding what I just said about the fact that Beijing has not controlled Taiwan for the last century. That the Chinese government in Beijing should be firmer with Taiwan, that it should give less ground and force the issue through threats and other kinds of practices to bring the two societies together under the political umbrella of the government in Beijing as soon as possible. So there is pressure from the streets, in other words, felt by the government in Beijing to move on this issue. At the same time, on the other side, in Taiwan, there is pressure on the streets felt by the government in Taiwan to move away, to become more independent more quickly. So for these reasons, then, I think Taiwan has to be understood as a flashpoint for war, one that implicates the United States because of the Taiwan Relations Act of the late 1970s. I want to move on now to the second major reason I think we have to pay attention to Taiwan. And that is because Taiwan has been an economic success story, and because relations between the People's Republic of China and Taiwan are growing more important and more integrated. Taiwan is one of the four Asian tigers, or sometimes referred to as Asian dragons, along with Singapore, Hong Kong, and South Korea, whose economies have boomed since the 1960s and 1990s and all the way to the present. They are economically middle-class societies. They are powerhouses economically, considering how small their populations are. They have high rates of literacy, a very skilled labor force. So they are important places, far more important than their numbers of people would suggest in terms of the economic strength that they wield. China, which is trying to modernize and grow its own economy, very much needs Taiwanese investment. It needs Taiwanese skilled labor. It needs Taiwanese technological skills. So there's a real interest besides the political interest in bringing Taiwan closer to China. On the other side, in Taiwan, there is a need for markets for Taiwanese goods, which tend to be high-value goods. There is a need for low-wage labor, which will make the production of goods that much less expensive. So we see then, for economic reasons, the two countries growing closer together. And yet, and this graph here, I think, points out very clearly the growth of the economy in Taiwan, exports growing up very, very rapidly, faster than imports from China. Okay, so there are mutual interests as these economies become more entangled. In addition to that, there are growing person-to-person relations, or there's a growing person-to-person integration between the societies in China and Taiwan. We see this in a great many areas, and this is sometimes opposed to the real tensions that we see at the formal diplomatic political level, some of the tensions I've already been talking about. But now, in very recent years, we've seen the opening of direct air travel between mainland China and Taiwan, something that didn't exist before. We see tourism going in both directions. We see Chinese students studying in Taiwanese universities. We see Taiwanese students studying in Chinese universities. We see marriages developing between people who live on both sides of this political divide. We see religious pilgrimages taking place as people who live on Taiwan revisit religious sites that have great significance to them, historically speaking. So on a person-to-person level and a societal level, we see growing ties. We see less and less tension, one might say, while at the state-to-state level, we see ongoing and sometimes increasing tensions. Another important reason for us to understand Taiwan is because Taiwan is a very new and important democracy. In fact, it is the first stable democracy in some 3,000 years of Chinese history. Taiwan emerged as a democratic state in the 1980s and 1990s, transforming from an authoritarian one-party state into a multi-party state whose leadership is elected. The transition was peaceful. No less. And one of the key points then is that Chinese culture, Chinese society can actually support democratic rule, something that was suspected as not being true for a long period of time. And the person here on the left, named Chen Shui-bian, was elected president. He ran first and did not succeed, but then later did succeed and became president. And Chen Shui-bian represented the sentiment in Taiwan that was pro-independence. Okay. So when he was up for election, mainland China was extremely worried that he might be elected and that this would give greater political legitimacy, a larger megaphone to the voices of independence. And it tried to use threats. It did use threats to try and persuade the Taiwanese voters not to vote for Chen Shui-bian for president, because to do so was to invite ongoing serious political problems with the government in Beijing and potentially military conflict. Therefore, before the elections were held, the government in Beijing fired missiles into the ocean, and you can see the map here as to where those were, to threaten the Taiwanese and to say, we can do this at any time. Don't elect somebody who is going to antagonize us and create greater problems. So here we see democracy going back to the issue of Taiwan as a potential flashpoint for war. In general, mainland China maintains an extremely threatening military posture toward Taiwan, with some thousands of missiles aimed at Taiwan on a constant basis, meaning that the people in Taiwan live with the ongoing threat of an attack from Beijing. Now, they've come to realize that that's very unlikely there's going to be a military attack, but the threat is always overhanging life in Taiwan, and it creates a kind of apprehension. The two states are only about 100 miles apart, and were the government in Beijing to decide to invade Taiwan, to try and take it over, it could do so very easily if the United States did not intervene. The government in Beijing has spent a lot of time and effort trying to show what democracy leads to in Taiwan, which, as this photograph suggests, is chaos. Here we see people actually from the legislature in Taiwan fighting physically in the legislative arena. And what Beijing does is it posts photographs of this all over the press and says, democracy leads to chaos. Our form of rule is better. Don't support the idea of democracy if you want a stable society and a growing economy. And the government in Beijing has also traditionally pointed out the weaknesses, the faults, the problems with American democracy. So rhetorically speaking, the government in Beijing also makes this effort to say democracy is not a winning approach. But in very recent past, this man here, Ma Ying-jeou, was elected to the presidency being in 2008. And unlike his predecessor, Chen Shui-bian, Ma Ying-jeou, who's very westernized, he attended Harvard, he speaks fluent English. Ma Ying-jeou has been a much more satisfying figure as far as Beijing is concerned. He's made a very concerted effort to bring down the tensions with Beijing, and to support the idea that closer ties, greater economic integration is important. And we see here this very important agreement was reached in 2009, passage of what's known as ECFA, which stands for the Economic Cooperation Agreement Framework, which is all about making trade between the two entities, Taiwan and mainland China, much easier and therefore leading to greater integration. Some people in Taiwan worry about this and think that what it means is that the power of the economy in mainland China is going to overtake that of Taiwan and lead de facto to the absorption of Taiwan into the broader society and political order of Beijing. Finally, it's important for us to think about, to know, to keep in our vision Taiwan, because Taiwan represents a very interesting laboratory, an alternative site of Chinese culture and society, which we can compare to that in mainland China with its own distinct history. Taiwan, for example, has preserved traditional Chinese culture in ways that the mainland has not. The Communist Party, after it came to power in 1949, went out of its way to destroy traditional religion, to destroy Confucianism, both of which have flourished in Taiwan ever since. So while there was a kind of dead end for hundreds of years of Chinese culture on mainland China in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, in many respects all the way to the present, in Taiwan these things continued to flourish, and therefore we see their continuing living place in the world, which many in China are actually very interested in. Buddhism, Taoism, as well as Christianity have flourished in Taiwan, where, as in mainland China, they are only now starting to make a comeback. And many Chinese who are interested, that is, people who live in mainland China, governed by Beijing, are very interested in and moved by the religious culture in Taiwan and are drawn to it and are coming to Taiwan actually to worship at various different temples. They become givers to temples in terms of financial donations and so forth. So this represents the preservation, if you will, of traditional forms of Chinese culture, which we are greatly interested in because they have been destroyed, as I've already said, in mainland China. This slide I show simply because I think it's a very good illustration of people who are believers, who are praying here for good luck before the new year. Another really interesting way in which Taiwan has served to preserve traditional Chinese culture and practices is in terms of the writing system. In mainland China in the 1950s, once the Communist Party came to power, it in the interest of trying to raise literacy rates, it went out of its way to create what is known as the simplified character writing system, and that was believed to be easier for people to learn and therefore easier for people with low levels of literacy and education to acquire, meaning therefore that the people are empowered and have greater access to the written word. We see the simplified writing system on the left. The system on the right means the same thing. Hanzi. They both are the same two characters. The simplified on the top there with the three strokes coming down on the left. On the right, we see the complex with the three strokes coming down to the left of the character. They both mean Chinese characters. The one on the left is what's used in mainland China. That on the right, the traditional form, is used in Taiwan today. This is important because in Taiwan, the preservation of the complex or traditional form of the character preserves also the identity in many respects of Chinese textual tradition. In Chinese, the characters convey not only meaning, but also a particular visual effect. And if you think of the traditional Chinese art form of calligraphy, which essentially is making an art form out of the writing of a Chinese character, the art and the meaning of the character and how it is written are all integrated together. They cannot be separated. This is the character for dragon on the left of the traditional form. On the right is the character for dragon in the simplified form. I think we can see the extraordinary contrast between them. That on the left then is beloved by Chinese people and preserves a sense of the Chinese textual tradition going far back in time. So in summary then, I think the various different points that I've covered hopefully will persuade us of the need to bring into our classroom, to bring into our field of vision, into our students' field of vision, that there is this very important other China there, that being the Republic of China and Taiwan. While it is dwarfed in terms of its population by the society governed by Beijing on mainland China, while its economy, powerful, successful, is dwarfed by the growing, surging economy in mainland China, the other Taiwan is important for a lot of reasons. We need to understand that it could be a flashpoint for war. We need to understand that it is an example of democracy in a Chinese political and historical context. We need to understand that it is a preserver of certain forms of traditional Chinese culture and social organization that enables us to understand a modern form of a traditional society in a way that we cannot if we look at what is happening on mainland China and has happened since the Communist Party came to power in 1949. And two, I want to make sure that there's an understanding that Taiwan is also important because it is growing closer and closer to China in economic terms, but also in the other terms that I discussed here. And therefore, that what we are seeing is a growing integration of the two societies, creating perhaps what may one day be a larger, greater China, a greater Chinese sphere. Thank you very much.